Okay, hey everybody, welcome to the webinar. This is Petr Opec, and today, 1 week after NIS2 directive came into effect, I'm going to show you how to ensure NIS2 compliance without risking costly consequences, and even criminal prosecution that come with non-compliance. Now to put this into context, let's take a quick look at some recent events. Remember the CrowdStrike incident? The CrowdStrike incident totally crippled the entire world, making all kinds of companies and services stop working as they should. Air travel, hospitals, banks, shopping malls. Actually, a huge number of Windows computers in those companies stopped working, showing only the infamous blue screen of death. And just recently, Fortinet, another global security giant, got hacked. And to make matters worse, after CrowdStrike incident, security industry experts said that this is new normal, meaning this will happen again, and next time it could be far worse. And mind you, the CrowdStrike incident wasn't a malicious attack, but simply friendly software update. However, the consequences of the CrowdStrike incident exposed the incredible lack of preparation on the side of all too many of the world's critical companies' services for handling this incident. Because without proper preparation, recovery after such an incident should take only a few hours, not several days. And with proper preparation, most of these companies should have been able to avoid the full effect of such an incident. Now, as you probably have understood, that's exactly what NIS2, the latest version of the EU Network and Information System Directive, is about.
Mama, you are me.
Preparing companies like yours to avoid the consequences of the next CrowdStrike-like incident or any malicious hacker attack by increasing cyber security enforcement required for critical infrastructure sectors. NIS2 is here to ensure that you are prepared, secure, and compliant so you can minimize damage, and avoid costly and potential dangerous consequences. Now, let's take a closer look why the NIS2 directive is so important for both your company and yourself. Now, let's take a closer look why the NIS2 directive is so important for both your company and yourself. Because NIS2 directive affects almost all of us, and the reason for that is that it divides companies into two different categories: essential and important entities and other entities. So let's look on these entities. As you can see pretty obviously why NIS2 calls these essential entities, because they are critical for well-functioning society. As you probably aware, these industries, energy, drinking water, and wastewater, are all depending on industrial control systems. And the definition of different sizes of companies stress that fact, as every company, except some small entities, are included for all the categories listed on this slide. So, if your company falls into any of these categories, you must definitely take NIS2 seriously. Now, the same goes for important entities. These are similarly important for well-functioning society, and as such, we can fully understand why they are included. Similarly, essential entities, these industries, chemical, food manufacturing, and waste management, are all depending on industrial control systems. And the definition of different sizes of companies stress that fact, as every company, except some small entities, are included for all the categories listed on this slide. And the same goes here as well, because if your company falls into any of these categories, you also should take NIS2 very seriously. But it doesn't end there, because NIS2 puts some very strict expectation on what you and your company, one of which is reporting, because reporting is mandatory. This means that any incident of significance must be reported to the CSIRT or competent authority. And an incident is significant if it has caused or is capable of causing severe operation disruptions of services or financial loss for the entity concerned, or it has been affected or is capable of affecting other nature or legal persons by causing considerable material or non-material damage. And mind you, the bar is set very low for what kind of incident you are expected to report on. This means that you are expected to report on incidents that you might say are insignificant. And if you don't report those incidents, you are not compliant and liable for penalties. So, questions you need to ask yourself are, am I fully aware what I am expected to report on? Do I know who I am supposed to report and how? Do I have necessary reporting capability and capacity in place? Now, let's look another part of NIS2 that some of you might find both disturbing and inviting: audits. Because NIS2 gives the authorities a lot of power with obligation to supervise and enforce the directive. They are expected to perform all sorts of audits, be it random checks, ad hoc audits, or security scans. The authorities can also request all sorts of information to assess the cybersecurity risk management measures. Risk management measures you've adopted. And since the authorities have a right to request evidence of your implementation of cybersecurity policies, the burden of evidence is on you. So, the question you need to ask yourself are you ready to meet NIS2 inspector? Will I pass an audit, a random check, or security scan? Am I really prepared for NIS2 inspector knocking on my door? The importance of you having the proper answers to these questions cannot be understated. This is because your answer will determine whether or not you or your company risk being penalized. Because NIS2 presents severe penalties for non-compliance. Administrative fines is one of two penalties types. As you can see, penalties for non-compliance are pretty hefty. Ask yourself, do I have cash to pay these fines? Can our company afford 10 millions on administrative fines, definitely affecting my bonuses? But it doesn't stop there. It also introduced criminal sanctions for management executives. NIS2 aims to change the sentiment of who in the company is responsible for cybersecurity. Introducing criminal sanctions for management is an attempt to lower the pressure put solely on IT departments to single-handedly ensure the security of the company. NIS2 therefore includes new measures to hold top management personally liable and responsible for gross negligence in the event of security incident. That simply means that not being NIS2 compliant makes you risk criminal sanctions should any security incident occur. This poses some interesting questions for management executive. Are you willing criminal sanctions because your company isn't NIS2 compliant? Are you willing to risk being publicly identified as responsible for security incidents? Which brings us to the question, who this webinar is for. For obvious reason, this webinar is for all companies not yet NIS2 compliant and all their management executives, as they should have a personal interest in making sure that their company is NIS2 compliant. However, it's also for managers, engineers, and technicians, as management executive cannot do it all by themselves. Why an ICS business continuity package, you might ask? Well, to begin with, because business continuity is one of the requirements for NIS2 compliance. Secondly, because ensuring business continuity for your industrial control systems is what it's always been about. And it still is. And it will continue to be what it's all about. And NIS2 just verify that fact. But let me first introduce myself. My industrial control system journey began in mid-90s. I was fortunate enough to be hired by Siemens, the power generation division. And as you can see, I was both much younger and greener than I am today, but I was very eager to learn. This came in very handy as I was thrown into the deep end of the pool from my very first day at Siemens. And lucky enough to get to work on some of the most advanced industrial control systems of time, like Siemens TXP and Siemens T2000. Not only that, but I was also lucky enough to work on one of the biggest automation projects of that time and installing systems which are still working today. It was during that time that I had realization, an epiphany, if you will. The real challenge of our clients faced wasn't technical failure. It was knowing how to handle not only technical failures, but also any incident that might occur. And that challenge was lack of knowledge. And that wasn't because they didn't have access to knowledge, as they had a lot of manuals available. However, the knowledge they needed was burdened in the thousands of pages of these manuals. So, my epiphany was that the real problem was lack of knowledge, which set me on the path that I am still on today, making my life missions to help companies using industrial control systems have the knowledge they need readily and easily available when they need it. So, based on my own journey, what I've seen, experienced, and realized working in Siemens and with clients, the main problem facing companies relying on industrial control systems is lack of knowledge. The whole world recently experienced the hard way from supply chain disruptions to outages in critical infrastructure. We've seen firsthand what happens when systems are only compliant but not truly secure. This makes it clear that the time for action is now. And that's where NIS2 comes into action. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, what exactly does the NIS2 directive mean for you? The directive is not just another set of the rules. It's a response to very real and growing problem: cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. As these attacks continue to rise, the NIS2 directive provides a framework for reducing risk. Think of it as a defense strategy, one that, if implemented correctly, will significantly lower your exposure to cyber threats and ensure your systems remain resilient. However, in my mind, the perhaps most important effect of NIS2 is that it forces all companies affected to handle the lack of knowledge problem in a structured way. Because ultimately, the effect of recent events like CrowdStrike and Fortinet all comes down to lack of knowledge, not knowing how to prepare for such an incident in order to quickly be able to restore operating conditions. So, if you've been struggling with errors in your systems, keeping your old systems running, essential system to be reliable, safe data transfer to the third parties, first of all, you are not alone. These problems are symptoms of the deeper issues of lack of knowledge. They point to vulnerability in your ICS setup that opens you up for incidents and makes you a target for attacks. Because it's not just about keeping things running. It's about securing your company, keeping your operations running. And the hard reality is that the real reason you are struggling with these things is lack of knowledge, which in many cases comes from the company having no focus of building a knowledge base. Relying on few knowledgeable people, meaning when people leave, knowledge disappears. Doing little or no training of essential personnel. Reducing the workforce, leaving technicians do administrative work. And finally, relying on third-party help for almost everything, because required competencies are no longer available in-house. After having visited numerous plants, I'm sad to say that this is more the norm rather than expectation. Because everywhere I have been, they struggled with these challenges. And ultimately, these challenges leave businesses vulnerable and ill-equipped to handle incidents on their own. As such, hopefully we can agree that the lack of knowledge is the source of all our ICS worries. Then the real question to ask yourself quickly becomes, how can I overcome my lack of knowledge challenges? This leads us straight to the 3 secrets of compliance. Processes and procedures to know how to do, what to do, when to do. Secret number 1 is to stay in control of all essential connections to your ICS system. And secret number 3, installed asset, is to be aware of all installed assets at your ICS. Now, What this 3 secret does is help you to move from current state, where your industrial control system isn't NIS2 compliant, and to an improved state, where you are ensured that your industrial control system is NIS2 compliant. So, let's talk about first secret, processes and procedures. Think about it. When an incident happens, what specific actions needs to be taken? How do you ensure that every team member knows exactly what steps each action requires to prevent an escalation? Without clear documentation and well-defined processes and procedures, you are essentially leaving things to chance. Remember, the most secure systems are ones that anticipate problems and have a step-by-step plan of action for addressing each of them. This became very clear to me on my many site visits with clients. I always started by asking them for the available documentation, and seeing the blank look in their eyes, the answer was obvious. Because while they did have some documentation, they simply didn't have any processes and procedures simplifying the information hidden in the documentation, which meant that problem was twofold. They didn't know how to carry out the tasks necessary for the ICS to run uninterrupted. They have also unable to properly perform the tasks necessary to prevent incidents from happening. And as a result, they were in the grave danger of having their ICS shut down due to lack of maintenance or simply due to unwanted incidents. This makes it perfectly clear to me that to enable clients to properly handle keeping their ICS running uninterrupted, while at the same time preventing unwanted incident to happen, I would need to help them to put proper processes and procedures in place. Now, in order to do just that, I first needed to help them to know what procedures to implement. And then, what processes and procedures to put in place for the 3 most important ICS areas. Assets. Preventive processes and procedures aimed at avoiding incident happening at first place. Reactive processes and procedures aimed at how to handle incidents when they occur, such as hard disk failure. Predictive processes and procedures aimed at to avoid things happen. Think in log files, imminent problems developing. Tasks, processes, and procedures for how to perform critical tasks like maintenance, backup, and recovery. Processes and procedures for how to perform regular tasks like checking for alarms and errors, log files check, vulnerabilities, risks, and updates. And last, processes and procedures for how to handle incidents like accidents, security breaches, hacking, and failures. Well-defined processes and procedures basically enables you to know exactly what to do when they need to do it. I really got to see the impact of having a comprehensive set of processes and procedures at the side of client who was struggling with keeping the industrial control system running smoothly. The situation was so bad that they had several occasions where subsystems completely shut down. Not only that, but they experienced critical incidents every week. This, of course, had a very costly consequences for the client. And the reason why was the simple fact that no one really knew what to do, when to do, and how to keep the plant running smoothly. Even though they also had thousands of pages of documentation at their disposal in their manuals. However, not being able to extract the relevant knowledge at the required time made all available documentation useless. Fixing this situation meant that we had to help them to put all necessary processes and procedures for maintenance, troubleshooting, backup, and recovery in place. After all processes and procedures were put in place, and the employees were trained on how to use them, the situation for my client had completely changed. The plant was running smoothly with absolutely no incidents, and as a result, saving my client millions in production stops. Now, for the second secret, secure data transfer. Data is required to report on device performance, to improve efficiency, to prepare invoices, to feed grid operator. However, you need to take complete control over connections to your ICS systems, ensuring that communication channels are as tight as possible. You need to know where is the cybersecurity perimeter and have tight control over it. One of the things I learned early on when working with Siemens was that the newly installed communication cabinet should look neat and clean when you were done. Actually, the old guys with Siemens gave you hell if that wasn't the case. The reason for this was when that was the case, the person in charge knew exactly which cable went where and what it did. This meant that the system were secure. And since this was pre-internet, things were a bit easier. Nowadays, those neat and clean communication cabinets are long gone. And no one knows where the cabinet cables goes and what they do. Not only that, but the physical security preventing unauthorized access to these cabinets and to the ICS workstation is pretty non-existent. And sadly, this has been my experience over the last 2 decades of visiting clients on site. Which lead me to the conclusion that in order to be able to help client ensure his industrial control systems are secure, we would need to take complete control over all connections to the ICS. This means making sure client which start by learning what type of connections are needed, what kind of data dealing with, where data is being sent, and who is on the other end of the connection. So let's look into more details. Knowing all type of connections, service connections for third parties, control connections like from dispatch center, monitoring connections for antivirus programs, for example. Knowing what kind of the data we are dealing with, be it real-time data, log files, reports, backups. Where data going to and how they reach the intended destination, being cloud, government site for billing, real-time dispatch center. And last, to know who is on the other end of the line, when he is connecting, where he is connecting, and how he is connecting. Is he using simply unlicensed TeamViewer? Now, to really put in perspective how important secure data transfer is, let me tell you what happened with a client of mine. This client had a problem with a critical pump and hired a third-party vendor to fix the problem. A technician from third-party vendor arrived with his laptop, assuring my client that it was completely safe. However, what technician didn't mention was that his laptop was loaded with pirated software and even with some pirated movies. Now, as you probably are aware, such a laptop should never, ever be connected to an industrial control system, ever. In this case, that is exactly what happened. He connected his laptop directly to the ICS network, which was also linked to the variable speed drive he was working on. And just a few seconds later, alarm sounded, and the network monitoring system displayed malware attack in progress. Fortunately, we had just installed new network monitoring system for this client. The network monitoring system then did exactly what it was supposed to do. It immediately detected the unauthorized connection and the malware attack, and continued to immediately isolate the technician's laptop from the network. As a result, this quick action saved our client €5 million per day in lost production and hundreds of thousands in repair costs. That day, the executive and managers of that plant fully understood the importance of having full control over all connections to the industrial control system, especially third-party connections, and the critical role of one-way communication in ensuring and securing their systems. Needless to say, my client was very, very happy. So an interesting question for you guys is, do you have full control over all third-party connections or devices at your plant? Another interesting question for you guys is, can you afford to pay millions of euros per day as a result not having full control over all connection to your industrial control system? Finally, I have this question to you guys. Do you have a proper processes and procedures in place to ensure that no device is connected to ICS unless it has been verified as safe? Now, to make sure you don't have any unsecure and undocumented devices connected to your ICS system, you need to know everything about your installed assets. That brings us to secret number 3, installed assets. The industrial control system is made of hundreds of individual elements, both hardware and software. All these individual parts are working together to ensure the ICS system works flawlessly and without incident over time. To make sure all of these parts actually keeps working as they should, they must be handled in a proper way. And to do that, everyone involved needs to know exactly what to do, when to do, and how. And that's all about the knowledge. At Siemens, no project ever started unless it was fully documented, where assets list and asset features were documented. So, at every visit at client site, one of the first things I asked for was the asset list. However, to these days, I never received a well-documented overview of installed assets from any client. As a consequence, the very first task at hand was finding out what assets they actually had installed, where they were installed, and how they were configured. To this day, this is equally important for every client project at every client site. But since the world has changed drastically over the years, especially when it comes to cybersecurity, now it's also extremely important to document and evaluate the vulnerabilities and risks related to each asset. Because sadly, I have yet to be positively surprised when asking the client for this information. So that's why it became clear to me that there really was the only one way to approach this. This is what you need to do. First, you must make sure that you know all types of assets you have. Hardware like PLCs, I/O modules, sensors, HMI, panels, computers, servers, laptops, switches, routers, firewalls, cables, power supplies, and so on. Software like operating system, databases, PLC softwares, firmware, BIOS, configuration tool, licensing tools, you name it. Because every type of asset you fail to identify representing a gaping hole in your security setup. Secondly, you must know what asset you have installed and where each asset is installed. This is important because if you don't have this information, it would be literally impossible to handle any incident that might occur. Sadly, all too many of our clients have experienced this in the hard way. And I've personally seen it myself at site visits where people that should know have no clue what is installed and where. And make no mistake about it, the cost of this kind of inaction is very high. The third thing you must do is to make sure every vulnerability and every risk related to every asset are documented. Because unless you handle and fix all vulnerabilities and risks, you leave your industrial control system wide open for incidents and attacks. In essence, you have to document everything. Because if you don't, there is no way you can ensure your industrial control system is secure and risk-free. Now, let me tell you how fixing this made my client very happy. We did an assessment of the ICS system of clients that just have seen their OEM warranty expire. The assessment discovered about 3,000 vulnerabilities in both hardware and software. And to make matters worse, it turned out that the OEM had been aware of this before warranty period expired, but didn't do anything about it. As a result, not only the OEM acknowledged this, but they also fixed all the vulnerabilities at their own expense. So following our proven processes of performing ICS system assessment, we managed to save the customer about 2 million euros on update recommended by the OEM, which in essence meant that the OEM would charge our client to fix their own errors. So, who needs this? This stuff kind of makes you think, right? It's also something I suspect you know or realize. Is it a challenge? Because what we've been talking about isn't something you can take lightly. Especially with NIS2, which became mandatory for all affected companies a week ago. So, let's recap what we've been talking about. Over last hour, I've talked about a lot of things. Let me recap what we talked about. The first thing I talked about was the importance of having proper processes and procedures in place. The second thing we've talked about was the importance of ensuring secure data transfer. And third thing I talked about was the importance of having detailed information on all installed assets. And the fact that all these are vital to ensure your industrial control system, ICS, becomes NIS2 compliant. So, question then is, who needs this? The simple answer is that all companies included in NIS2 overview are of essential and important entities needs this. It's the only way those companies can become NIS2 compliant. However, it's also every company with industrial control system needs in order to minimize the risk of unwanted incidents. Now, what? Wait, critical question is, how can I ensure NIS2 compliance for your industrial control system? Some of you might know how. If you do, please let me know in the chat. So, you need a complete package. That means you need to find out someone that can help you to put in place all the things I've talked about today. Processes and procedures, detailed overview of all installed assets, and secure data transfer. Which is addressing ICS business continuity, which is addressing all topics discussed today in beautifully designed system, accompanied with a giant knowledge library we gathered almost over 30 years. ICSbusinesscontinuity.com. We have created a system which allows you by systematic approach to create all necessary procedures, which are ranging from disaster recovery to patching all of your equipment. The ICS secure data transfer is to build to safely transfer any type of the data to the other system. Platform is also capable of performing calculations, visualizations, archiving, and analysis of the data in a way that your ICS stays safe, unhackable. We have also developed a unique system which allows you to create cybersecurity and maintenance data sheet for each asset identified at any time. At any time you are aware of NIS2 status implementation through highly configured KPIs. And now